While international attention remains focused on military strikes and regional escalation, another brutal campaign is unfolding right inside Iran. Rights groups say dozens of protesters have been executed since the war began, with more than dozens of people facing imminent execution as we speak. In Esfahan alone, just in Esfahan, more than 70 protesters are said to be under death sentences, while prison, hunger strikes, and family protests have received little attention around the world. Is the Islamic Republic using the war not only to strengthen its grip on power, but to carry out a crackdown that the world is barely noticing? Joining me now are Brandon Silver, Director of Policy of Projects at the Roel Wallenberg Center for Human Rights. He's also an international human rights lawyer. Azadeh Afsahi, a human rights activist and founder of Iran House, and Shaheen Milani. He's also a human rights lawyer and the executive director of the Iran Human Rights Documentation Center. Thank you so much to all of you for being here on such an important topic. So let's get started. Right groups say that at least 45 politically motivated executions have taken place under what Iranian authorities are calling quote unquote wartime conditions. More than 70 protesters, like I mentioned, are facing execution in Esfahan alone, and Iran Human Rights estimates that around 100 political prisoners, and I know you're in touch with political prisoners, Azadeh, have already received death sentences. On Thursday, the regime executed Mehdi Khanaki, accusing him of being a spy for Israel, and of course, is always a charge that they receive in a kangaroo trial. Now, we often interpret mass executions as a sign of fear, and it is, because you're taking everything out on essentially the most innocent of the population. But is there another way to look at it? Could you also have it reflect confidence, in the sense the regime believes that the war has fundamentally changed the strategic environment for them, and that it can now act with fewer consequences, and while the attention is on the war, they can take it out on the people of Iran? Brandon, I'll start with you. What do you think?
Well, firstly, Nagar, thank you for having me on your program as a regular viewer. It's a privilege to be a part of it, and particularly alongside panelists like Azadeh and Shaheen, whose work I deeply admire, and particularly appreciate your shining a spotlight on the plight and pain of the people of Iran. And I would contextualize the stories you've shared, the heartbreaking personal costs to everyday people, with the staggering statistics that underpin it all, that Iran continues to have. So preceding these executions, Iran already had the highest per capita rate of executions in the world, the highest rate of child executions more generally, and the highest rate of state hostage taking globally. And at the same time, also the highest per capita rate of imprisoned journalists. So clearly there is an effort to obfuscate, to hide these staggering statistics, and which is part of why as well you and your colleagues at Iran International perhaps have been targeted for the same reason, that this information reaching the world is a source of fear for the regime. When you talked about what may be underlying these efforts, it's an ongoing campaign of mass domestic repression that perhaps unwittingly, or as part of some misguided policy, the world is ignoring, when we've seen historically, and all the more so today, that this mass domestic repression often morphs into external aggression, that what we allow to happen to the people of Iran within the country inevitably is carried out externally against Iranian dissidents, diaspora members, journalists like yourself and your colleagues at Iran International, and human rights defenders. We've seen, following this intensified rate of executions, intensified assassination attempts abroad. You yourself broke a story about how my mentor, Professor Kotler, the former Attorney General of Canada, was subject to an assassination plot. And just a few days ago, we marked the anniversary of the Amia bombing, where 85 people were murdered, over 300 injured. That also continues to be subject to impunity. So by continuing to speak out, call out these acts of internal repression and external aggression, we can hopefully help mitigate it, but we need to move beyond these sorts of statements and move towards action. Those responsible for these crimes continue to commit them with impunity. And again, when they're able to carry this out within Iran, it puts all of us everywhere in danger. So it's a misguided effort to try to on the part of government seemingly ignore what's going on for the sake of political expediency or for some agreement when we see that that actually puts our own sovereignty in danger at the same time.
You're right. It affects all of us. And we do need to go beyond political statements. I know that President Trump put out a statement on X saying that calling the Iranian regime, savages for doing this and asking and pleading for amnesty for these people, which is, a step in the right direction. But also, what are you hearing from political prisoners yourself? Give us some insight.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for sharing the space with Shaheen and Brandon. I think I want to go back to the statements that all these politicians are making. This is great that President Trump is putting out this statement and shedding light on this. But what are the actions? We cannot, none of the countries, what's happening in Iran right now, is granting any refugees to any of the people that have paid the highest price. Not in the United States, not in any of the European countries. So they are stuck between the two evils right now. And that's exactly how the people inside of Iran are feeling. Yes, the bombs are making noise and the world is looking at Iran. But what about the silence that is killing innocent people every day? And not only are they being executed, but their families are being affected. And I think last week was one of the mothers who lost the baby that committed suicide. So I don't think the last 4 years that I have been working exclusively on Iran, I have seen the wave of depression and the trauma that the Iranians have experienced since January. One is because this happening, the regime is obviously cracking down on the survivors, on the protesters, but also the indifference of the international community, that they are not trapped and nobody seems to care. And everybody cares about the bombs, but nobody cares about the hanging that is happening every day. So I think we expect the Islamic Republic to do this, but we never expect the free world, the politicians, to allow it to happen. And after my visit at Oslo a month ago, I realized it's because of these politicians that the Islamic Republic is in power. And I now hold them accountable, not the Islamic Republic, because we already know what they're capable of.
Shaheen, what do you think? And I mean, as Azadeh pointed out, these people are being killed in silence.
Yeah, so, we have to go back to January of this year and consider that we just saw perhaps the largest massacre in Iranian modern history. Thousands of people were killed within 2 days. We still don't know the final count. And what I would say is that the Islamic Republic might be more afraid of the Iranian people than from the US or foreign military intervention. Because they know that, the US isn't going to attack with hundreds of thousands of soldiers to overtake the country. They're not going to do another Iraq. It's not going to happen. So the threat that they face, the most serious threat that they face, is from internal rebellion. This is from Iranian people bringing the regime down. So that's why they killed all those people in 2 days in January with a brutality that wasn't even seen in the very brutal history of Islamic Republic itself. They set a new standard in their own regime for brutality. And that's why they are, going on with these executions, because they're afraid, but also because they have to show force. And they have to send a message to Iranian people that we're not going to go anywhere. We're going to kill as many of you as we can. And then they also have to send a message to their own supporters to, strengthen their resolve. That we can kill. And they also want to make sure that their own supporters don't defect, so that they use an iron fist to try to control the situation. Now, given the very dire economic situation in Iran, I think that at some point in the future there's going to be more protests, because there's, you cannot kill your way out of economic misery and discontent. So you might postpone the next round of protests, but I think at some point we're going to have fresh protests in Iran again within the next few years, if not the next few months. So then the question is, what the world will do next time. Will they be ready with, sanctions and a complete repudiation of the Islamic Republic and its, the complete delegitimization of this regime, like expelling all the diplomats, acting in a way that shows that this regime is fundamentally illegitimate? Or they're gonna continue the same manner of trying to negotiate with them and just criticize them a little bit, but not push for fundamental change. But I do hope that, I do think at some point maybe the rest of the free world will come to the conclusion that, like the Iranians will have, that this regime must go. But when that will happen, we'll have to see.
Yeah. That's like what Azadeh was mentioning, that she holds those officials accountable to a certain extent. And like you said, Shaheen, it really depends in what direction we're going to go here. And you also said something interesting. They can't kill their way out of this when it comes to at least economic pain. But could they potentially silence a population by increasing and ramping up executions? What do you guys think?
No. Absolutely not. I can tell you, for all the survivors that we are treating, whether it's been a psychological torture or a physical torture, I can reassure you, all of them says, once there is a protest, we are ready to go out again. And that's the resilience, I think, that society doesn't see, that Iranians are ready. They're just waiting, like Shaheen was saying, they're ready for that next ignition to be able to go out again. And these are people who have been paid the tremendous amount of trauma, have experienced, and they're saying that to me on a daily basis. I don't know where they get their resilience, but I'm sure I'm very proud of them.
Yeah, it's really incredible. And so inspirational. So, Brandon, on a policy level, then, with all of this in mind, what leverage do governments have to affect some sort of change here and to potentially influence the regime's calculations in the middle of this war? Because it appears like Shaheen and Azadeh were saying, that the regime is essentially stalling and buying time at the meantime right now.
Well, if the Islamic Republic did not care about its international standing, reputation, and relationships, they would not be seeking to send out their high-level officials to speak at the United Nations, as they did a few months ago when Abbas Araghchi and other high-level delegates were participating. They would not be seeking to target you and Iran International and BBC Persia if they were not afraid of the information of their atrocities and crimes would be reported to the world. They will not be actively trying to evade and breach sanctions upon them. So I think their own behavior tells us where the leverage lies. As Shaheen alluded to, there must be consequences for these actions. So firstly, continuing to expose what's going on, hold them accountable, cut through the state propaganda is an important first step. And to ensure that there are walkouts wherever they may try to send an official. The fact that a number of states decried the Iranian leadership's crimes was, frankly, the bare minimum. Nobody should be shaking their blood-soaked hands. There should be expulsions. It's commendable that Canada had closed its embassy in Iran, and likewise expulsed the Iranian ambassador some years ago. Australia recently did the same. That should be replicated across the board because Iran does not conduct its diplomacy as most states do. Beyond this mass domestic repression, we saw that, Iranian diplomats were recently convicted of seeking to carry out crimes abroad. So these diplomats are not only mouthpieces for these crimes against humanity, and I use that term because that is what the United Nations itself on many occasions have determined the regime is committing, but yet they continue to have that platform. So we need to remove these platforms from these officials, expulse those involved in obfuscating these crimes at home while seeking to commit crimes abroad, and then ensure that these same officials cannot have access to the banks, the businesses, and even the beaches abroad that they so often try to enjoy while denying the most basic and fundamental rights of their people at home. We're seeing, amidst this increase in violence and war, a lot of regime officials seeking to send their family members abroad to engage in illicit finance abroad. And that shows, again, another point of leverage that we can be engaging in visa bans, asset seizures. We have a new law in Canada that allows for assets not only to be frozen, but to be seized. So I would propose that it would send a powerful message. Not only should we block these officials from entering the country and freeze their assets, but we should seize them and give it to their victims as a message of solidarity and support. If they're so afraid of these protests, we frankly should be offering the funding that these regime officials stole from their people to support those most in need of support on the ground.
It's amazing the leverage that we still have in the West and what could still be done that hasn't been done, unfortunately, and maybe we will be headed in that direction, like you said, to incentivize the Iranian regime here in some form or fashion. Azadeh and Shaheen, I just wanted to conclude with you guys in terms of, Azadeh, we'll start with you and then Shaheen. Give us an idea, a sense of who these people are who are being killed or about to be killed.
These are ordinary people, just like you and I, that want a different future for themselves and for their children. And I think once we start seeing that they're no different than what we are, then maybe the world can empathize with their pain. Because they're young people who, especially with social media now accessible, can see what the regime is robbing them for a future. Because not only don't they have the freedom of speech, a freedom of being, freedom of religion, but they also, because of the economical hardship, because of what Brandon was just saying, the corrupt, they don't even have a future when it comes for them to just have a normal life. So I would like to conclude that I understand, again, that the bombs make noises, but so we need to also understand the hanging of these people also required the same attention as the bombs.
Shaheen?
Yeah, so the people who they're executing, many of them are people who were involved in the protests, and then they're arrested. And the regime charges them with crimes such as moharebe, which means waging war against God. So the regime sees itself as representing God, and then whoever is rising up against it, they say that they are waging war against God. For that particular charge, under Iranian law, weapons should be involved, but often protesters have not been armed. They're just, peaceful protesters. They might have clashed with the security forces at some point in the streets, partly in self-defense, but for the most part, they're not armed. And anyway, the trials are sham trials. They're never public. The regime doesn't provide any evidence, any credible evidence against them. And they torture them a lot so they can extract confessions. And anyway, because the point of the exercise for the regime is to instill fear, is not to mete out just sentences. So the people who are being executed, many of them are young men who took part in the protests, or they're friends of young men who took part, and they're just implicated. and it just goes on. And in many cases, the individuals that we hear their names, they are people that we might not even know that they were, we might not have known that they're imprisoned, because the regime, they threaten their families, and they put pressure on them to stay silent, and they don't know that that's just a ruse by the regime, so that ultimately they can sentence them to death. So by the time that human rights activists, they learn of a name of an individual, it's either sometimes it's just the day before that individual is put to death, or sometimes it's just after. We just hear from that through the announcement by the regime. And it is very difficult because, as you know, the news environment is dominated by news about the military conflict with the U.S. And the people who are being killed like this are often ignored.
Yes, and it's very tragic, and I thank all of you for taking the time today to raise awareness and for the important work that you all do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.